Hello and welcome to ITV News Meridian.
Tonight's headlines in the southeast. Travel disruption and thousands still without power across Kent and Sussex as the southeast is battered by the third storm in less than a week.
We're all electric, there's no gas up here and it's freezing and we don't know where we stand. There's been no communication.
With people being told not to travel by train again today, I'll have the very latest on the weather-related disruption.
Also on tonight's programme, demanding justice. A former Kent sub-post mistress wrongly accused of theft calls for post office bosses to be held to account for the computer errors that wrecked so many lives.
And planning for a party, remember those? Preparations underway for Queen's Platinum Jubilee street parties this summer.
Good evening. Thousands of people across Kent and Sussex have endured a fourth day without power during the third storm to hit the southeast in less than a week.
UK Power Networks engineers continue to work at dozens of locations where fallen trees brought down power lines. In Kent, almost 4,000 still have no power and 3,700 are waiting for reconnection across Sussex.
In a moment, we'll hear about the major disruption to travel that's continuing across the region. First, Sarah Saunders reports from one of many communities still without power, the village of Warehorn, near Ashford.
Sorry for the disruption this power cut's causing. We'd like to reassure you haven't forgotten us and staff are working round the clock to get your power cut. That's it. These mean nothing, these texts. They're platitudes.
No heat or light, no hot water or gas to cook hot food. For 4 days, Melanie Olymbios in rural Warehorn has had no power and she feels abandoned by UK Power Networks.
We didn't expect to go back on Friday. The winds were hideous. Didn't want anyone to put themselves at risk. But now it's cold, we're all electric, there's no gas up here and it's freezing and we don't know where we stand. There's been no communication. We're being fobbed off at every point. And we just want some support and some honesty.
Joanne Chilman has been keeping her family warm with a wood burner and attempting to cook on it too.
It's cold, I've got elderly parents that live with us and because we're in a village, we've got a lot of elderly people and they just can't keep warm.
UK Power Networks have put food trucks on offer, is that right?
They have, but they're 30 minutes to 45 minutes away. They don't come to this particular area.
The company say they are providing some 8,000 meals a day, with trucks deployed to places like Uckfield in Sussex.
So we've had people come in to fill up their hot water bottles because they couldn't sleep. Hot food, cold food, drinks, people wanting water as well because they've had no water supply.
And UK Power Network maps show the scale of the problem. In Sevenoaks, engineers are on site, dealing with the worst storm event for power failures the southeast has seen in a decade.
You know, my sympathies go out to anyone that doesn't have electricity at the moment. The situation is that since Friday, when Storm Eunice hit, we've had over 2 months of fault, 2 months worth of faults in that short period of time. So we are working just as hard as we possibly can to get power restored to everyone that has been affected by this storm.
Energy Minister Greg Hands visited Kent to see the network provider in action.
I think overall the response from the companies has been good. UK Power Networks, I think, has put in a good response here in the southeast. And as I say, across the UK, 1.3 million people have had their power restored so far.
UK Power Networks has introduced an extra compensation payment and hopes to have power restored to everyone by the end of tomorrow. Some will want to see the lights come on before they believe it. Sarah Saunders, ITV News.
Well, 4 days of storm-force winds have brought chaos to road, rail and cross-channel travel. Today, once again, the Southeast major train operators advise people not to travel if possible.
It comes as a major engineering project on the Brighton Main Line also struggled in the bad weather. James Dunham sent this from Three Bridges in Sussex.
It's been another testing day for train operators. Southern, Thameslink and Southeastern urging people to only make journeys if absolutely necessary. Here at Three Bridges they are also dealing with a huge engineering project, and from here there are no trains to Brighton or Lewes, with passengers having to use a rail replacement bus instead. Add in a 50-mile-per-hour speed restriction, bringing more delays and cancellations. It's not been the easiest of Mondays for train passengers. It's not storms disrupting trains between Brighton and Three Bridges, but this £15 million engineering project. This, some of the 1,500 metres of new track being brought in near to Haywards Heath. The weather making work over the weekend more difficult.
We had a delay getting a lot of our equipment to site. Most of our equipment comes on engineering trains. Due to trains being on the track, we couldn't get the trains to site. So we've had to change driver hours. Our supply chains had to be flexible, and we're trying to consolidate as much into the blockade as we can now, and still hope to hand back on time Sunday night.
Working day and night, teams will replace 8,000 tonnes of stones that support the tracks and renew 8 sets of points.
It's an old layout, so it was originally laid in the early 80s, so it's tired, it's not reliable, we get lots of failures, we get lots of alarms. So once we've relayed the junction, passengers will have fewer delays over that critical bit of infrastructure, which allows trains into and out of Haywards Heath.
But to get there, buses will be replacing trains until Monday when the line reopens. Well, this is the bus hub, and the marquee is holding up despite the stormy weather, and over the next few days thousands of passengers will make their way through here onto one of over 300 buses being put on every day as part of the Brighton mainline upgrade. At Brighton, passengers weren't too downbeat this morning despite contending with engineering works and wind-related delays. Is it quite frustrating having to get a bus instead of a train?
It's not, because it's quite straightforward.
Trains prior to mine were cancelled. So, like I said, it's very inconsistent.
We've got to do what we've got to do at the end of the day. It's not their fault that the weather's obviously caused a lot of havoc. So I think everyone seems to be okay.
They are thinking of the people, putting other people first before their services, which
so it
means
makes
a lot.
To cancel
it does make sense, a lot of sense.
With the gusts easing this evening, relief for workers trying to regenerate the railways and for the passengers trying to use those trains which are running. Well, the 50-mile-per-hour speed restriction has been removed tonight, and the good news is that despite dozens of trees falling across Kent and Sussex over the last few days, all routes are open. But the problem is that train crew and the actual carriages themselves are all in the wrong place, meaning the industry's not really had a chance to catch up and recover because of the relentless weather we've had since Friday. So delays will continue in Kent and Sussex into this evening. On the ferries, the FDS is warning of continued delays. At one point they were seeing delays of 90 minutes on their services from Dover, and the QE2 bridge has remained closed with winds of over 60 miles per hour recorded, bringing long tailbacks approaching the Dartford crossing.
James Dunham reporting there from Three Bridges. In other news, police are trying to establish the full circumstances surrounding a fire in Burgess Hill in which 2 people died. Emergency crews were called to a house on Theobalds Road in the early hours of yesterday morning. The bodies of a man and a woman were found inside.
Train journeys in the southeast fell by almost 80% last year, according to figures from the Office of Rail and Road. The effects of the pandemic meant just over 60 million trips were made by rail compared to more than 300 million in 2019.
Now, the Prime Minister's ending all COVID restrictions nearly 2 years after the first lockdown. He's announced a strategy for what he calls living with COVID. It means another booster jab for the over 75s and an end to the legal requirement to self-isolate if you get COVID.
From April, lateral flow test and PCR tests will no longer be freely available to everyone. But despite these changes, the government say the pandemic is not over.
Well, our political correspondent Phil Hornby sent this.
Case numbers are down, hospitalisations are down, deaths are down, spring is just around the corner, so the government say now is the time for life to get back to normal. So from this Thursday, as you said, it will no longer be a legal requirement to self-isolate if you have COVID, although the advice, of course, will be to stay at home. This is what the Prime Minister told the Commons.
We can now deal with it in a very different way. moving from government restrictions to personal responsibility, so we protect ourselves without losing our liberties.
And perhaps most controversially, from the 1st of April, there will no longer be free universal tests for everyone, lateral flow tests and PCR tests. We've all got used to going online and ordering those lateral flow tests or expecting a PCR test to be done for us. That will all end on the 1st of April. There will still be testing, of course, in medical situations, in care homes and so on, but not universal testing for everybody, which is costing taxpayers £2 billion a month. The opposition say the government are going too far too quickly. It is a gamble, but the government say now is the time to get back to normal.
Phil Hornby reporting there. A former Kent sub-postmistress who lost her job after being wrongly accused of stealing £30,000 has called for somebody to be held responsible for the flawed IT system which was to blame.
Grandmother Pauline Thompson ran the branch in the village of Matfield near Tunbridge Wells before the Horizon till equipment began reporting discrepancies in her takings. Her conviction for false accounting, along with those of 38 others, was quashed at the Court of Appeal last year.
She's been giving evidence to a public inquiry in London. From there, Kit Bradshaw reports.
Why did the Post Office accuse hundreds of its branch managers, sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses with stealing when they raised concerns about a computerised IT system known as Horizon? That's one of the many questions this public inquiry is seeking to answer, and it's been hearing firsthand in recent days from those whose lives were turned upside down by errors in that computer system which they were assured could not be wrong. Pauline Thompson is now 72. Back in 2008, she managed the Matfield branch of the Post Office when the newly installed system began reporting discrepancies with the amount of money in the till and the takings it was logging. At first, these shortfalls were fairly small, but they eventually spiralled to more than £34,000 by the time auditors came knocking in September of that year.
One of them said they've just gone to get some paperwork. And I carried on, and then, 5 minutes later, a police car pulled up in front of the post office. And then, the two policemen came in, and the one investigator that wouldn't talk to me at all immediately said, charge her with theft.
Mrs. Thompson went on to explain that although she was initially charged with theft, she accepted a lesser charge of false accounting when it went to trial as part of a plea agreement. She avoided prison but lost her job and her livelihood, and she said that her and her late husband struggled for money and became fearful of authority. It would be more than a decade later before her name was cleared, along with dozens of others at the Court of Appeal, in what became one of the most widespread miscarriages of justice in legal history. She says she doesn't want an apology, but accountability.
I just feel that nobody's been actually held responsible. Nobody's held their hands up and said, we got it wrong. Everybody's just been moved to one side, given another job or whatever, and yet they went on and on and on and prosecuted all these people.
In a statement, the Post Office told us that whilst it's not appropriate to comment on any individual cases, it is in no doubt of the human cost of the Horizon scandal and is doing all it can to fairly address this for the victims. Across the country, more than 700 former branch managers were wrongly suspended as a result of the flawed IT system. The public inquiry continues. Kit Bradshaw, ITV News, in the City of London.
You're watching ITV News in the Meridian region. Coming up.
As Gillingham's fight against relegation suffers a setback, can they do enough to avoid the drop?
And after an unusually stormy spell of weather, can we expect something a little quieter for this week, or will the unsettled conditions continue? I'll have your forecast.
And you can find more on today's top stories in the region throughout the day on our website. Go to itv.com/Meridian. You can call us on 0808 1010 095. And remember, you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
Now, figures revealed exclusively to ITV suggest cases of sexual abuse of males may be greatly underreported. One survey carried out by an abuse charity said half of men questioned admitted they'd been victims of unwanted sexual experiences.
Campaigners say they've seen a huge rise in calls to helplines for men and boys and want more to be done to raise awareness that sexual abuse victims can be both female and male.
Well, the Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner says it's vital men who are affected know they can get help and support. Kevin Ashford has been investigating.
Alex Bryce still lives with the consequences of the trauma he suffered as an 18-year-old student. Alex says he thinks he was drugged during a night out and then raped. He never reported the attack.
When it happened, to be honest, I'd been socialised, I guess, to believe that rape was something that only happened to women. So it was quite a long time before I knew something bad had happened, and I knew sort of intellectually, I guess, that it was a rape. But I didn't kind of put the two together. So for quite some time, I was sort of trying to come to terms with and find the right words for what happened to me. And actually, reporting to the police never even really occurred to me, to be honest.
Research revealed exclusively to ITV that was carried out by a charity that specialises in supporting male victims suggests the scale of abuse may be even bigger than previously thought. Mankind says half of more than 1,000 men questioned in a survey said they'd had unwanted sexual experiences. 1 in 10 said they'd been raped. Much of the problem is hidden, with only an estimated 1 in 20 males reporting abuse to the police. The Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner says it's vital that men who are affected know they can get help and support.
Very often a man won't want to go to what they perceive as a service that is just for women only, and I totally get that. Although a lot of the services do support men as well, but often men will need a male-only environment. And I think it's really important that police and crime commissioners like me, who have responsibility for victims of crime, make sure that those services are accessible in their areas.
Hello, you're through to the National Male Helpline.
The Safeline sexual abuse charity says calls from men and boys to their helpline rose by 110% last year. The charity maintains anonymity for both callers and call handlers. As they say, they've found this produces the best results.
What sort of help can you give them?
Reassurance that they're not alone in their experiences. Reassurance that there's nothing wrong with them. Very often survivors carry such a sense of shame and blame and guilt for what's happened to them.
Men are often forgotten about. The government launched a strategy last year called Violence Against Women and Girls, which was absolutely needed. But the title of that piece of legislation in itself marginalises certain groups, and we need to stop talking about it as something that happens to one particular gender. It happens to a lot of people, so the more we start being more inclusive about that, the better.
Staff here said they expect even more abuse cases to come to light because of the pandemic, as, in particular, younger victims found themselves isolated and vulnerable during lockdown. Kevin Ashford, ITV News.
In response to our report, a Home Office spokesman told us, "We recognise men and boys also experience abusive and violent crimes that fall within the umbrella of violence against women and girls. That is why in 2019 we published a first ever cross-government male victims position statement, and the Home Office continued to fund the Men's Advice Line run by Respect to provide support to male victims of domestic abuse."
Well, the ITV Evening News continues with the national and international news at 6:30. For more on this, let's to London and Mary Nightingale. Coming up, the Prime Minister sets out his plans for life after COVID in England. It means an end to all restrictions with no legal requirement to test or self-isolate. We'll look at whether this signals an end to the pandemic. Also ahead, after Dudley and Eunice, now Storm Franklin batters the UK. And
yo, what's going on, people? It's Jamal Edwards.
An inspiration to so many. The legacy of Jamal Edwards after the music entrepreneur's sudden death at 31. Do join me for all that and more at 6:30. Now, street parties are a British tradition which sees neighbours across our region gather together to mark times of national celebration, and the Queen's Platinum Jubilee in June will certainly be one such occasion.
But for those keen on a bumper bash in the middle of their road, should get planning now to avoid complications later, as Nick Smith reports.
Bunting, buffets, and with a tipple or two of booze, the Great British Street Party is a tradition which stretches back more than 100 years. And over the last century, we've seen communities packing out tables outside their homes on landmark occasions. While partying in the open air may seem like a far-flung idea on a cold day in February, another royal milestone is on the horizon. Wayne Mott from Rusper near Horsham is planning the local Jubilee shindig, and he's been inundated with help.
Rusper is famous for its May Day, and this year the May Day committee have really stepped up to the plate for the Jubilee celebrations. We're all coming together. The school are involved, the parish council, the district council. The pubs have been brilliant, they're offering lots of support too. And actually all the locals, we've had overwhelming number of people step forward to help us.
This unassuming neighbourhood claims to be the UK's street party capital, hosting outdoor get-togethers every year. I'm meeting with Chris Gittins, a street party enthusiast who offers advice on hosting them, insisting it's never too early to get planning.
You do really need to get cracking now because it's not far off, and councils do need a bit of notice for the road closures. Some quite long, some are short, but some long. And so you need to talk to your neighbours first. That's what it is. It's fix the date and the basic ideas, and then someone's got to do the road closure, and that takes a bit of time. You can worry about the detail later, but getting it going is what you have to do now.
In an age of health and safety regulations, you might be forgiven for thinking organising a street party is a nightmare of forms and red tape, but official government advice states that you won't need a drinks licence or public liability insurance so long as you don't plan on selling alcohol. For quiet streets where you need to close the road to traffic, it's advised to contact your local council at least 6 weeks beforehand. You also don't need a food licence, but it's advised people ensure anything served is safe to eat. And raffles and tombolas are fine so long as tickets are sold at the event and prizes are either donated or don't exceed the value of £500. While some councils have waived charges for road closures, there's a bit of inconsistency across the board. The Big Jubilee Lunch initiative aims to get as many street parties as possible taking place over the planned June bank holiday, and is appealing to the Department for Transport to simplify their guidance.
So some councils, amazing councils, have been offering free road closures and making it easy, but some councils are really confused with the transport legislation. If you invite your neighbours and it's a closed street, there's things about proportionality. So we're just asking them to make it easier for councils to understand what is a legal requirement and what's guidance.
In many places across the region, community strength has been what's helped many through the COVID pandemic. And as the Queen marks 70 years on the throne, it's also the perfect excuse to come together and celebrate what makes our local neighbourhoods so special. Nick Smith, ITV News.
Definitely is. Good excuse to have a party. I'm looking forward to that.
Hopefully good weather in June.
Well, better than we've had the last few days. And Holly joined us now. Now, 3 storms, Holly, in 5 days? That's got to be quite unusual.
Yeah, it is unusual, of course it is. I mean, we've only been naming storms since 2015, but it is the first time the Met Office has named 3 storms in a week. I mean, you think back to 2013-14, that was exceptionally stormy. And we probably saw something similar there, but it was such a stormy year. That was part of the reason why they introduced storms. But what was particularly unusual this time is just how powerful Storm Eunice was.
When did we realise that Eunice was going to be so bad?
Well, even on Monday, we'd named the storm, we'd issued warnings, and I remember saying in my weather chat, we're a bit concerned about this one. But of course, at that time, Eunice didn't even exist. And it's one thing forecasting a storm system that already exists and you can see it tracking your way. But when something isn't even in existence yet, that is, well, no mean feat, I have to say.
Was it Storm Eunice? That was the worst of the storms, but Franklin, now that has caused some problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at some of the gusts we've seen with Franklin. They have been a step down compared to Eunice. Eunice brought 71 miles an hour at Shoreham Airport, only a little bit of a difference there, but Manston, Langdon Bay was 77 with Storm Eunice, so quite a step down there. But interestingly, Eunice brought southwesterly winds, whereas Franklin brought northwesterly winds, and that in itself can be quite problematic, because if you imagine, if you buffered a tree from one angle and weaken it, and then you buffered it from another angle, that, even if it's not as strong, that wind can be enough then to take it down in the second bout of winds.
Just like my fence panels.
Holly, thank you for all the information over the last few days. Let's find out, though, what's coming up next. Here's Holly.
Feels like home, whatever the weather. Valent Boilers and Heat Pumps sponsors ITV Meridian Weather.
It is, I'm afraid, still a bit of an unsettled look as we head through this week, although nothing compared to the sort of weather that we have had. But yes, often quite windy and some spells of rain with us as well. But let's take a look at the bigger picture. So tonight we've got a warm front heading our way. That brings milder air for a time. Then a cold front for tomorrow will pick up our winds and bring some rain. Wednesday, milder but quite breezy. Thursday, an early spell of rain with this feature. And then chilly, even the chance of a few wintry showers. Into Friday, higher pressure builds in. And that will give us probably the best day of the week, I suspect. A bit of dry and bright weather to end the working week. Out there at the moment, a few showers perhaps just skirting parts of Kent, otherwise largely dry, starry skies, and temperatures start to fall away. Towards the tail end of the night, though, thickening cloud, a little bit of patchy drizzle, perhaps a touch of hill fog maybe, and those values start to recover. So as we head into tomorrow, I think quite a cloudy start, a little bit damp, a little bit murky. Then we see a slice of sunshine, but it doesn't last. This is our cold front, so that brings some patchy outbreaks of rain, really, and the winds pick up a bit. So gusts of 30, maybe 40 miles an hour in exposure. As it clears through, so some cooler air, some chillier air starts to tuck in, but a brighter end to the day with some showers as those winds swing round to more of a northwesterly direction. Our high tide times, you've got Dover at 2:14 and again at 2:33 into the afternoon. So Wednesday, I think, probably quite cloudy, a bit breezy. Thursday, we see that spell of early rain. Then some colder air tucks in. As I say, that could lead to quite a chilly and showery look. But some brighter weather to end the working week. Take care.
Valent sponsors ITV Meridian Weather.
Well, hurrah for that. We could have a nice Friday, fingers crossed. Now, in just a moment, the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
For now, though, from the team here at ITV Meridian, thank you very much for watching. Heather Edwards has our late news, but from all of us, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.